So I would like to just acknowledge that Judge Wurrung are the traditional owners and custodians of the land and waterways of our region. We recognise their living cultures and ongoing connection to country and pay respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to elders of other regions who may be watching. So welcome to everybody on behalf of Goldfields Libraries. This is one of the many great events we've been having over the last few months. We've got more coming up over December, January, including some excellent stuff on the climate, especially geared to younger people. So if you want to, if you've got any younger people, especially teenagers who want to know what they can actually do about all this weird climate anxiety stuff they're feeling, check out our webpage and keep an eye on our YouTube channel and our events pages, because we've got some really great events about young people talking about what they're doing, how to deal with climate anxiety, different activities they can do. So I think that's probably the most exciting things we've got coming up in the next few weeks, but we've got all sorts of other things coming up too. But today we have two great writers. On behalf of Goldfields Libraries, I want to thank our two guests for this evening, Ramona and Robyn. I'm going to let Robyn introduce Ramona, but I will introduce local legend Robyn. So Robyn Annear has lots of amazing books of social history, including her most recent book, Nothing New, A History of Secondhand, which is available in the library and in many, many bookshops, except for the ones where they're sold out. Robyn is becoming a bit of an old hand for our YouTube channel. She was our very first YouTube person, our test subject, and she's been an absolute trooper, jumping in at last minute or sometimes, hopefully, with enough warning most times to jump in and help us out with some stuff. And she's been doing a great job, which is why we keep asking her back. So thank you very much for being here, Robyn.
Hey, Stuart. Thanks. That's the modest Stuart Windsor from Goldfield Libraries, who never tells us who he is, but he is the one who makes the magic happen. Welcome to everyone, and welcome especially Ramona Koval A. Ramona, as I'm sure you all know, is a fixture, has been a long-time fixture of Radio National, and many of us know her voice, if not her face. Well, here she is in living colour. Ramona's a writer, a journalist, a former broadcaster now, although I'm sure I hear her on the radio sometimes. She's an honorary fellow at the University of Melbourne's Centre for Advancing Journalism, and her books include Bloodhound, Searching for My Father, and Buy the Book. I like that one. I like the idea of buying the book. Do buy the book. Buy the book, A Reader's Guide to Life. And of course, the one we're talking about tonight, A Letter to Layla, Travels to Our Deep Past and Near Future. Welcome, Ramona. What an adventure you've had in putting this book together.
It's been an adventure. It's been an adventure over 5 years, I might say. Partly because I didn't really know what the book was about when I started to investigate it. I don't know whether this is the same with you, but sometimes, well, I just sort of get a strand and start sort of pulling it. Wonder, why am I interested in this? And it sort of leads to something else and leads to something else. And then, you know, I look back and see what it is these strands have made, really. I mean, or I start to knit and I decide it's much too long for a scarf and not really wide enough for a blanket. So what is it? You know?
Well, this one is definitely a fair old garment, I'd have to say. Some very tricky knitting here. In fact, I almost suspect that you needed a good lie down at the end of this book. So maybe, not that anyone has welcomed COVID, but perhaps having a bit of a breather wasn't unwelcome in preparation for the book making its appearance.
Yeah, I mean, 5 years of going all over the world and going through a lot of interesting sort of intellectual areas, you know, science and some philosophy, I suppose, but linguistics and history and artificial intelligence and genetics, all of that meant that, you know, I just kept thinking, oh, am I up to date with everything? And you know, you can use those sort of Google alerts, and you can put all the things that you're interested in following, and then as soon as it's somewhere someone publishes anything in the whole world, you get an alert. Oh, X, more interesting stuff about artificial intelligence. Oh, something about ancient DNA. Oh, And so for 5 years, my whole morning, you'd come to the computer and you go, oh my God, there's this and this and this and this. I've got to read that. And does that make all this stuff I've read and written about, does that mean it's out of date? And so highly anxiety producing. So when I sort of finally sent the final edits back, yeah, a lie down was exactly what, and then I had a lockdown, lie down and lockdown.
So tell me, do you still get all those Google alerts? I'm interested to know. Do they still come in and you go, something new?
No,
or do you cancel them?
I get them and I say, I don't care. I can't do anything about it anymore. So, and I'm thinking about unalerting myself now too.
I think that's
although I still am interested. Look, I probably won't do that, but it's not. It's like an interesting, that's interesting. Oh, yes, I thought that might happen in the future. Oh, no, it's happened a bit earlier than I thought.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It doesn't mean, oh, my God, I've just got to, change.
Put in an extra page. No. Ramona, would you like to give us a taste of the book and give people a bit of a lead into what we're going to be talking about? So
I will, because you asked me to do a little reading, and I'll just read a little bit from the introduction.
That'd be terrific.
I'm going to hold my book up here so that it's not all weird for the sound. So anyway, I hope this works, right?
It's going to work.
When I was younger, I assumed that those in power who were older than me were also wiser, and that I could entrust the ship of state to their steady hands. Now most of the middle-aged adults in charge are my junior, and I'm no longer convinced that this is the case. The young people I speak with think the same way or feel the same way. Sharing wisdom freely is the province of the grandmother. But when the world we invite our grandchildren to live in is poisoned and parched, and there is a struggle for food and space and security, the old wisdoms don't hold. Wise elders were useful when the world faced by the young was not much changed from that of their forebears. This was how it was for most of the time humans have been on the planet, not any longer. I look at my grandchildren, all aged under 15, and think of the uncertainty they will face. I think about which adults will pilot this almost 8 billion person juggernaut as it careers into tomorrow's unknown. When we give power to those who would steer us, they often disappoint. All too human, we say, shaking our heads. But what does it mean to be all too human? How did we arrive at this moment in history, holding the fate of life on Earth in our clever hands with their handy opposable thumbs? And what to make of the intriguing possibilities of our evolving to becoming more than human? This book is the story of my investigations into our pre-human origins and my attempts to map out possible trajectories into the future. On a mountain ridge in the Republic of Georgia, I found myself whispering about the soul with a paleoarchaeologist who had uncovered a group of 1.8 million year old skulls of an ancestor human species. In a steamy forest in North Carolina, I spoke with an expert on the way dogs moderated early Neanderthal human interactions, while her thoughts were preoccupied by the welfare of a domestic cat named Zelda. I explored the dark depths of a limestone cave in southern France, looking at Ice Age art, then spoke with the world's foremost expert on ancient cave painting about his fears for the future. I learned of a long-dead Soviet scientist and his efforts to create a human-chimp hybrid. I watched the leaders of a gathering of happy-clappy transhumanists in San Diego rally their followers in the drive to defeat death itself. I met robots in Berlin that will care for the frail elderly of the near future, if there are any, and considered what might happen to us when we succeed in making an artificial intelligence that will surpass our own. But I will begin at the beginning. If you start a story in the middle, I will stop you and beg you to go back. What happened first, and then what? We are programmed to receive stories and to transmit them. We've always told each other tales of where we come from. Today we call them origin myths, the first stories that different groups of people tell themselves. And yet there is one true origin story that the nearly 8 billion of us on the planet can share. So that's a little bit from the introduction.
That's so tantalising. That's a great taste of what people can expect when they dip into this book. Of course, you've only touched on some of the places you went, some of the people you talked to, and some of the things you investigated. It's such a panoply. You talk about you and story, and that comes up time and again. As you called it, your overwhelming need to fill in the gaps. And what that seems to boil down to often is the question why. So you're talking with scientists or futurists or whoever, and the question of, but why? What happened between them then and now, or what might happen from now to then? And you write, I like why, the question. It's a 3-year-old's question, you say, and it's a dreamer's question too. It's at the root of science and psychology, art and religion. Did you have any particular 3-year-old in mind when you were thinking that, when you were writing that?
You know, I started to write this book about, you know, what was this creature, this Homo sapiens, these people that we meet and we see and we read about in newspapers and we dream about when we look at films, and what is this creature that makes it, and what makes us human, and with a thought about, gee, what are we going to do about all the problems we have at the moment? And so, as I say, I like to know things from the beginning. So I was interested in going right back. And I mean, obviously, I didn't go back to the amoebas, but I went back to our most our nearest relatives, the apes. Yeah. When I was talking with a person who had studied chimpanzees, and trying to think about how they thought, and you know, whether they were just hairy humans who couldn't speak and they were just like us, which was sort of a fantasy of his that he'd had from when he was a kid. And after 20 years of working on them, his explanation for the differences between the apes and us was that they don't ask why. That they hear things that we hear, they see things that we see, they see the world in similar terms. Actually, some things they do much better than us in terms of their visuospatial ability, for example. But with all the tests that he did, with all, you know, he wrote a book called Folk Physics for Apes, trying to see if they knew A, could they apply this to this B situation? Yeah. And the overwhelming result was that they couldn't. They didn't ask why to themselves. And this is what humans did. And he compared, you know, humans, little humans of about 2 or 3, with apes, and he would teach the children one thing and the apes something, and sometimes they could learn how to do X, but then they couldn't apply it. Yeah. So I mean, so I started to think about the question why when I was studying this, but then my youngest granddaughter, and probably last grandchild, Layla, was born 5.5 years ago. So while I was doing this research, she was being dropped off by her mother, who was working and had stuff to do and had, you know, 3 other children and all of that. And so I would be looking after this infant from you know, when she was in a bassinet, and, you know, feeding her and, you know, giving her a bottle and looking into her eyes and engaging and looking at the way her mouth framed the shapes that my mouth was being framing, and all of the work that I was reading on my, I keep looking over there because that's where my desk is, looking over there on my laptop and reading and looking at all these YouTube. And then I thought, oh my goodness, I've got this one person, not really experimental. I didn't experiment, I just like to tell you, but I observed her. I had this little creature to observe. And I noticed that, you know, the way that she developed and the way she behaved, and she was, you know, she was on form. She began to ask why. Even the way she played with things before she could speak were kind of why questions.
No, explorations, yeah.
Oh,
weren't you lucky to have, but to make that connection, it must have been quite a different experience with a small child, I imagine, than what you'd had before, even with your own, because you were seeing her in this quite different way.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't remember, you know, I know really good mothers keep diaries or something. Yeah. I never, you know, those mothers who have like the book of, this is the book of your first word and this is the book of your first painting. And I mean, I do have stuff that I kept, like I kept all their teeth. You know,
Oh, yeah. But you put them in together.
I kept them together. I didn't realize it. And when, you know, one would actually, Layla's just lost her first 2 front teeth. It's so thrilled. But so every time they lost a tooth, I kept it because I thought, oh, I remember the night, you know, the nights of the tears and the low sleep and the, you know, all of that, Bonjela and all of that. So I kept it and I put it in a little thing. And then my other daughter would lose her teeth. But when the girls found this sort of graveyard of teeth, they thought it was really creepy. And apparently I should have kept them in 2 separate.
Kept them separately.
Yeah. But, you know, so, but what, which is a long way of saying I did some things, but I don't remember that. I mean, because, you know, I was so young and I.
Oh, you were a parent. That was the difference. You were their parent. Yeah.
I didn't have time to go, oh, that's very interesting.
No, this was just
oh my
lucky.
God, thank God they're asleep. I can.
Yeah, exactly. No, this was just a great piece of luck. Just to give the viewers an idea of the framework, in the first part of the book, you're exploring the deep past of the title, looking at those human origins. In part 2, you're looking towards possible futures, possibly even near futures, involving things like AI, robotics, transhumanism, cryogenics, all that stuff. And in the now, as well as in the why, we've got Layla, and she makes regular appearances in the book. She inches up in age over the course of the book, and your little interludes with her make us aware of how she's a case study, and also the reason. It feels a bit like she's the reason for the book, possibly because of the title, Ramona, a letter to Layla. What does she know? What I want to know is, what does this 5.5-year-old know about the book and about her name being on the cover, and what does she think about it if she does know it?
Oh, she thinks that she and I wrote this book.
Of course she does.
She says, oh, that's the book that my Bubba, which is Yiddish for grandmother, that's what Bubba and I were working on when I was a baby. And she said to me, she came home from kinder the other day, and she said, you know, someone's mother is reading a letter to Layla. I didn't realize that so many people would be reading it, and it's all about me. And but anyway, she thinks it's all right. She's a smart little cookie. And I really had to make sure that all my other grandchildren, the 5 of them, realise that their names do appear in this book. And I pointed out that I dedicated books to them even before Layla was born, and she missed out on all of that. So I've squared it off politically with all of them.
But her name's on the cover. She's always going to be.
You're not making this easier for me, Robyn.
They're not watching. Don't worry about it. Now, questions of origins, not human origins so much, but one human's origins, yours, were there in your previous book, which was Bloodhound, Searching for My Father. And I feel as if I can, and I don't know whether you feel this too, there's a bit of the source code, or you could even say, the DNA of this book in that one, because in that you're exploring DNA and family lineage, and of course seeking out informants and asking lots of questions, and ultimately speculating quite a bit too, making that story, exploring which scenarios might be true. But I'm guessing it wasn't as literal as that, was it? Was there any part of the beginnings of this book in your previous one that led you directly here? Digging,
you know, the idea of digging. And I've always been interested in archaeology.
That comes through.
Yeah, I mean, as a young, like I remember I think I was pregnant with my second daughter, and I tried to join the Victorian Archaeological Survey. They had volunteers over one summer.
Yep.
And I went to a few sessions, and at that point I'd done a science degree and I'd spent a lot of time in laboratories, and it was all going to be about stones and bones and measuring angles and stuff. And I thought to myself, well, you know, I don't really want to do any lab-based stuff anymore. But then I realized I wanted to do social anthropology. So I went to Monash and did a few years of anthropology.
Oh, really?
So this idea of digging and uncovering. And so with Bloodhound, which was really about trying to piece together the story of my conception after all of the protagonists were dead. And that, you know, this story came to me after all the important people had died because it was a secret. And I'm not a historian, you know, so I don't have the training, but I was trained as a scientist to look for evidence, and to make propositions about what theoretically what story you might tell about these particular points. I think that has been an interest all along. I tried an explanation for how the world is. I mean, my interest in science, I think, was because I was attracted as a girl to the idea that there were rules and there were universal laws. I loved the idea that there would be universal laws of chemistry, of physics.
Yep.
And, you know, if you did that and you added this, you would always get that, and it was
Yep.
immutable. And because my family was so obviously mixed up, complicated, secretive and difficult, I thought, well, at least this group explanation really appealed.
Yeah.
But I think that this, you know, so I did a bit of digging for Bloodhound, and I created a story that I think is plausible, but who knows? But then I thought, well, I really don't want to write a book about such close things, because, you know, it involved waiting for people to die as other people who weren't dead yet, but needed to be dead.
Yes.
In order for me to be able to write this. It involved, you know, treading on a few toes of people who I loved and I didn't really want to upset, but needed to make some pretty serious decisions about either not telling the story at all or telling it in the way that I felt was honourable. So that was tricky. But it worked out, and, you know, time goes on, people's noses are out of in their in joint, because there are other things that face families, and then we all, you know, get together about that. So I thought I needed to do something that was, you know, not so, you know, not a microcosm. But I thought I'll write about all of our families. I'll write about everybody's family. And then, of course, Layla turned up, and then it was really, you know, she's been a strand. But you know, look, you don't have to. She's the strand of human childhood, really. And her inquisitions and her inquiry, all kids do that, you know.
That's right. But
ask that sort of question, or at a particular time, and a mystery, you know. I remember, you know, when she was, you know, about 2.5 or something, she said something about, you know, can I ask you a question? And I thought, she doesn't even. How does she know what a question is? And so and it turned out she did know what a question was, but I don't know whether she knew that because that was a question, or because the word question is used in that sort of formula.
Heard someone say that. Wanted to try it out. Yeah.
So it turned out she's like every child, you know.
She works perfectly in the book, and I'm glad to see her name on the cover. She deserves it. You talked just then about science and how it appealed to you, and about this idea of making propositions about what, you know, about the story in between the bits that you can show, the speculation. But you ran into some, I mean, you're great at asking questions and great at bringing out characteristics in your interviewees. But when you were talking with Professor Bernard Wood, who's one of the world's leading paleoanthropologists, about fossilised human skeletal remains from a cave in South Africa, you wrote, I wondered if he, like me, had tried to imagine a story about how these creatures could have ended up in that place together. Yes, he replied, but stories are not science. How did you react to that? Because he sounded quite stern about it, like he was reprimanding you.
He was, and stories are not science. You know, he reminded me of all of those all those lectures that I had when I was doing my science degree, who had the same attitude. Stories are not science. And, you know, should I tell you about the first thing I ever failed? Probably the only thing I ever failed, which was my first year biology exam at university, because I hadn't done biology before, and I sort of I got a boyfriend in that first year, and there was a lot of going to the botany gardens at Melbourne University and having lunch in the botany gardens and skipping lectures.
That sounds like a euphemism to me.
No, it was just having lunch.
Okay.
I was an innocent.
The botany gardens, though, I don't know. There's something about that.
So I missed out on some lectures, and it turned out that in the exam, it was all about the excretory system of the spider. And I couldn't really remember anything about that, but all I remember was being impressed by the chitin of the spider's bottom. And it's a chitin, C-H-I-T-I-N.
Oh, yeah, right.
It's a natural formed, you know, element, but it's like sort of very hard plastic. And so they could excrete ammonia, just like they didn't have to turn it into anything else in their biochemistry. They could excrete ammonia because their bottoms were so strong. Anyway, that was all I remembered. But I wrote an essay about the chitinous bottom of the spider, and it turned out that that wasn't what they were looking for.
That wasn't what they were looking for.
They were looking for a system of biochemical, biochemical pathways. So the guy says to me, "Have you considered journalism as a career?" And I was so offended. How dare he? I'm going to be Marie Curie. I'm going to discover something,
But he was on the money.
He was on point. He was on point. But so of course, Bernard would sort of reminding me that I was really out of my depth talking about this kind of science. But he was funny because, of course, he's not going to dream. He's not going to imagine. He's going to just see, what do we have? What is the point we have? And what's the next point we have? And we're not going to stray anywhere from that. But of course, I think other kinds of thinkers do say, well, what happens if it's X? And if it's X, then what do we need to prove that it is X? So, I mean, I do think you have to dream a bit to have a theory anyway.
Isn't that what a hypothesis is? I thought it was.
Good on you, Robyn. I'm glad you agree.
But what do I know?
But it turned out that, and he was sort of, he was English and he was very proper, and he was sort of, he wouldn't be cajoled, and but he was funny because he did have a moment of sort of breakdown of this sort of serious formal expression, really, when I reminded him of a lecture he'd just given the other night before, which was when he looked at, he was talking about a tiny little diagram that Darwin had written in one of his notebooks that had just been published. And it was a little tree diagram. And it was the first diagram of his idea of relations of different species and how they were related to each other through a tree. And he thought this beautiful picture was wonderful. And he said it was just like, listening to a Bach, a piece of Bach. And I just thought, oh, look, I think there is a little bit of romance there. Anyway, I sent him the book, and he really liked it.
Oh, that's great.
I thought that he'd be really mad with me because I sort of paint him as this sort of formidable chap. But towards the end, I mean, he did say something really interesting, and that was, if he had his time again, he wouldn't do science. Yeah. He would study how people make decisions. And I thought that's an odd thing to say. But then after I'd traveled the world and I'd talked to all these people, and I'd come to some conclusions about what we really needed to do now, which is use our institutions that we already have, the WHO or these bodies that we have set up to communicate across the world and to learn how to make massive decisions.
Yes, yeah.
This is the answer to what we need at the moment, isn't it?
And this is what he was talking about.
I came to the conclusion that the grumpy guy that I went, is a bit of a grump, was actually on something. I think he really enjoyed that bit.
Who else I'm thinking about who else you spoke with. You spoke with Ian Davidson, who is he an archaeologist? I think so. No. Works in the area of archaeology and language development, which is fascinating. And in preparation for meeting him, I was so interested in this bit. It brought in your husband Dave, and the two of you were kitted up on your balcony, having a go at some flint napping, just so that you were backgrounding yourself for what you were going to be talking with Ian Davidson about. That was so impressive, especially because you had safety goggles on.
Yeah, that's right. Because Dave's very good at the safety aspect. He keeps stopping. Don't stop. Do not step on that. Wait, almost did all that. Flint napping, for those who don't know, is making stone tools. Getting a rock and getting another rock and making something that you can actually use to cut or to scrape or to use as a point to throw an arrow or to jab at something, kill something. I thought to myself, also because Ian Davidson, he's an interesting guy. He's a emeritus professor of archaeology at New England University, and he not only works in a theoretical zone, like tries to work out how language arose from the archaeological record, which is like, wow. I mean, how are you going to get something as ephemeral as language and try and find some kind of evidence for it? But also he was an expert on stone tools as well. So he sort of had his head in the clouds and his feet on the ground, and I kind of like that idea. But I just thought, well, if I'm going to discuss, stone tools, which is often the only thing that is left, one of the only things that are left of hundreds of thousands of years old, and even 1.8 million years ago, Homo erectus was using very, very primitive tools. I really needed to know how to do it. Like, what do you have to think about when you make a stone tool? I mean, how do you do it? And is it hard? And, because you think, oh, that'll be easy. But actually, it's incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
It's dangerous. And, if you get the right bit of, chert or something to work on, and you get a hammerstone, where do you hit it? And then once you've hit the first bit, where do you hit the second bit?
Yeah.
What are you actually trying to achieve? So you have to have something in mind about the shape that you're trying to get, and you have to have a progression about what you need to do. And it's dangerous because shards fly off in all directions, and they're really sharp, and you can cut yourself. Anyway, I ended up with the most pathetic sort of shard that I could use, and I cut up some tomatoes for an omelette.
That's impressive. That must have been sharp.
Listen, they were sharp, but if I had to go and get a mammoth and butcher it, I would be hopeless. I would be dead by now, because I wouldn't have eaten for months.
But just listening,
it just shows you how much, not only how much skill it requires, but then you think this must have been taught.
Exactly.
Taught you how to do this.
Yeah.
You must have observed, and there must have been a kind of, not everybody must have been doing this. There must have been some sort of division of labour, because there would be people who teach and people who do, and other people who are getting, something ready while I'm being taught this. And, you start to get, this is how a picture of something is framed and evolves if you get these tiny bits of information. So anyway, I don't like to be unprepared when I do an interview.
No, that was impressive. But while I was listening to you describe lint napping as done by you and Dave, you can really that really helped me get a picture of what Ian Davidson's sort of groundbreaking theory, which he now says he wishes it isn't what he was best known for, but it was kind of the idea that in order to do those things, both to figure out how to do this, to remember it and to replicate it, to do it better next time, to teach somebody else, activated pathways, he thinks possibly in the brain, which were the same pathways that would be followed by language subsequently, and that it may have played a role in framing, pictures, ideas that became words and language. So that was just so fascinating, especially as your book progresses and we learn about the way some people are pitching forward to the future and what may become of our brains then. It's really interesting to see how you and your book circle back to some of these ideas from prehistory. What else?
I should just say too that I went to these people because they knew stuff that I wanted to know about, and I didn't know them. I didn't know them at all. I'm just trying to remember if I think I didn't know any of them. Like, I pitched the idea that could I come and talk to you. A couple of people would, like Daniel Povinelli, the ape, the scientist, I spoke to on Zoom because he wasn't going to be in Louisiana when I was going to be there. And so there was that. But so I didn't know any of them. So I sort of turned up, and I had to, I had a whole day with David Lord Kipanidze in Georgia when we went to the Dmanisi dig to have a look at the Homo erectus, where Homo erectus had been found, and that was really interesting. But but most of them I didn't have much time. So I didn't know what to expect, but it turned out that with everybody I met, I got something about what it meant to be human.
Yeah.
What I expected, and not just what they knew about their particular area of expertise, but each of them taught me something about, about patience, or about, Ian Davidson showed me that, the way humans are flexible and adaptable, and you can go down one way of thinking, and then you realize that's not going to actually be fruitful. Then you can say, if you're clever, you can say that's not right.
Yeah.
Where will we go now? And what's a better way of thinking?
Yeah.
And or Lord Kibonitsi in Georgia, who I sort of spent the whole day following around, desperately trying to interview him. I don't know.
Slept through some of it, didn't he?
Famous Georgian hospitality. Georgia is where Stalin came from, so it used to be one of the Soviet satellites. And famous hospitality. There's a lot of drinking, there's a lot of eating, there's hospitable, and so every time
music, I think it was the Bee Gees, wasn't
it? That's right. He had the Bee Gees in the car. I was from Australia, so he knew that. So he's playing the Bee Gees, and I can say, "Oh, shall we talk now?" "Oh no, there'll be plenty of time for that." And there was always, and have some more wine. And I didn't drink, but because I don't drink when I'm working. But Dave would have some wine, and his bodyguards would have some wine, and we would go to somewhere else. But on the way, we had to go stopping for 3 or 4 different other jobs that he had. So I was kind of demented to think, I'm never going to get this guy to sit down. And I've come all the way to Tbilisi and then off to Dmanisi, and I'll get nothing. But then towards the end of the day, we sat down and he was ready to talk. And what did he talk about? The soul. He talked about,
what a surprise,
that wasn't going to be in any of these skulls that we'd been following. And inside the skull, he said there was no evidence of what he thought was important about being human, which was the soul. And I didn't expect that. I didn't. Every time I met somebody, they gave me some gem of experience, of understanding that I didn't expect.
Yeah, that your fearlessness and your sense of adventure as a journalist really comes through, and your experience as a journalist. I have to say, the way you just take these people on and take these situations on and just throw yourself into it and handle yourself really well in it, because you came up against some grumpy people and some people who were drinking. And the Bee Gees, that must have been hard to think straight while the Bee Gees were playing all day. So, well done. Let's have a bit. We've been dwelling in the zone of prehistory up till now, but let's just have a little talk about the second part of the book, at the beginning of which you travel to San Diego for the RADFest, which is the first Revolution Against Aging and Death conference. Tell us a bit about that, Ramona.
It was these things, you want one thing leads to another, leads to another. And sometimes you think you don't even know what you're going to get. I mean, that's, life's a box of chocolates. You don't know what you're going to get. So we turned up at this place in San Diego because I knew some people who had been writing about the future were going to be there. Yep. A man called Aubrey de Grey, who is a sort of cell biologist who is interested in aging, the aging cell, and how to stop aging. How to
stop it, yeah.
And there are people who had written about transhumanists, or people who were thinking about this surely can't be this body, which they call wetware, which I found really insulting. This biological body is, it's going to get old and die, and they thought aging was a disease that we should fix, and it was
cure it, yeah.
And that nature, the idea that nature has given us these bounties and we should just appreciate. Nature is trying to kill you, so nature is not on our side. And so their view was that if you could get a better body, if you could get an implant in your brain, if you could get some other way of doing, being superhuman, if you could fiddle with your genetics and you could add something, why wouldn't you? And why wouldn't you do that to your children? And You know, why wouldn't you?
Genetically, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this was, you know, we owe it to be better. And, you know, there's a little bit of Ayn Rand in all of this, I thought.
Sure, just a bit.
Just a bit. And so I was interested in these people and what they thought. And they were also involved in cryogenics.
Yeah.
You could get your body frozen just at the point of death. Officially dead as far as we're concerned, but if they grab you in time and they get rid of your blood and put other fluids in you and store you immediately in a, you know, a cold container with nitrogen, they could perhaps keep you there for maybe 100 years or something, maybe even more, until what was ailing you we already had a cure for, and then you could be unfrozen, and then they could fix you up.
Reanimated
in the future, and be able to see what happens. Or
the cryogenic head,
you could just get your head done. If you thought, this body, I'm not sure, I could get a better one. And there were people who were designing, you know, bodies for the future that you could perhaps pop your head on. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but there were other people thinking, well, you know, how would you do this? And they were trying to look at the sort of science of genetics and the science of cell biology and preservation. So meeting them was interesting. They were, you know, very, very highly educated. And I was interested to know what made them tick and what I thought about that.
And yeah, what were you sort of, I mean, well, let's just say, in talking to the prehistorians, you came away with the feeling that they were rather pessimistic about the future. I don't think you got the same impression from the transhumanists, from the future-looking people. Quite the opposite. I thought it
was notable that all the people who were used to thinking about the past, digging up the past, looking at
patterns in the past,
were fearful of the future. They were worried about the present. They were worried about the future, and I thought perhaps they knew a lot about what humans were capable of and had been capable of in the past, which sort of limited their optimism.
Yeah.
The ones who were used to thinking about the future, not just the kind of odd transhumanist ones, but, you know, people interested in artificial intelligence, people interested in robotics, they were much more positive. In a sense, there was sort of a technological optimism about them. And if you like, oh, you know, what about the population explosion? What about too many people? And they would say, look, no, that's not correct. You know, you have a look at all the populations in all of the countries that are having improving economies, and that's, you know, quite a lot of them, most of them perhaps in the world, and the populations are going down. And so, you know, the big population bomb is not going to happen in the way that they thought was going to happen in the 60s. You know, you think about the ozone layer, and you think about the hole in the ozone, and all that when we got together and decided to ban CFCs, now the hole in the ozone layer is almost gone. So things can happen when we get together. Look, have a look at what's happened in this pandemic. This is extraordinary. Do you understand the idea that we have like at least 3 vaccines that are promising, and that we might get a vaccine before Christmas can use, is extraordinary. And this is because of big pharma. This is because of communications, big communications. This is because of
big data as well.
Big data working together, artificial intelligence, trying to analyze the right, you know, shape of molecules to get and testing them in theory. This is just mind-blowing. And this is the kind of thing that they were talking about when they said, let's not get bogged down into, oh my God, we'll all be ruined. You know, we might all be ruined, but if we think properly about it, and if we get together in the right ways, and if we cooperate, which after all is one of the things that makes us human. Things about being able to nap, you know, stone tools and teach is about we work well in groups. We understand each other. We care about being in groups. I mean, that's why it's been so hard to be in lockdown for so long, because we haven't been outside we haven't been able to look each other, see each other, read each other's faces.
That's right.
You know, with the masks on, is that person smiling at me or glaring at me?
No, yes.
You know, and trying to, if you smile, try and smile with your
Make your eyes really squeezy, yeah.
and not looking like a lunatic.
Yeah.
Communicate, because it matters to us.
Yes.
You know, for example, that idea that the social psychologists that I read about saying, well, you know, we if you catch someone's eye across the room at a party or something, and they see you, you can clock them, and you know that they saw you and you saw them.
Yeah.
If they don't make a little sign or wait, if they just diss you or, you know, ignore you, we get really offended.
Yeah.
Because we are programmed to sort of communicate with each other
with gestures and
yeah, and like, you know, if you let someone go in the traffic, by all means, do. And if they don't do that little wave, or you get murderous. You go, God, what a rude person. I do anyway. And, that I do, and it's normal.
We're getting on to 10 to 8. I just want to tell you that Christine McKenzie has said, thanks, Ramona. She loves the story about the soul and the lack of evidence for it in the skull, which brings me to when you got to reflecting in the book on the sort of transhumanist, in particular, quest for a kind of immortality. You wonder this. You wonder, what if we needed more than just our brain structure to achieve human consciousness and intelligence? And that's where you circle back to the prehistory, the role of things that humans did with their hands to framing those sorts of pathways, and for things like the development of language. But where do you come out, either as a result of the research that you've done for this book, or in the first place, about consciousness and where it might reside? Is it just a trick of cognition? You know, is it just something in our brain, or is it somewhere else?
Well, I think, you know, I am convinced it's throughout our being. You know, I mean,
and outside of it.
Oh, I don't know about that. But maybe, you know, but maybe, you know, I'm just not an ideologue, and I'm not. I don't sort of make hard and fast rules about things that I can't possibly know. I mean, I certainly, well, Damien Broderick, who's actually an Australian science fiction writer who lives in America now, and he would sort of put, when I said to him that, you know, the idea of all these dead people frozen in Arizona was sort of like a death cult, and you know, preserving this life, and you know, what did he make of it? And he was sort of made fun of me, and he said, oh, you know, like it's as if people said, oh, why don't we make flying machines? And other people said, oh, you're just trying to be angels and you're trying to go beyond the human capacity. How ridiculous. And you think, well, you know, 500 years ago, if you said that you would be able to talk to people in your own house, and you'd be able to see them, but they wouldn't be there. They would be in Castlemaine. Yeah. And you'll be in Melbourne, and you'll be able to speak to them and look into their eyes, and it would just be insane. You'd say, how could that possibly be? So anyway, I'm not going to say I believe that, you know, consciousness doesn't exist anywhere other than in the head and in the body. I don't know. I haven't seen good evidence for it. But I'm open. I'm open. I'm curious, you know. I'm a curious Homo sapiens. I'm if you prove it to me, I'll accept it if it sounds right. But you know, some of the things that have been invented, you know, for like prosthetics for people who are disabled are wonderful. You know, so people who haven't got the communications of their legs and arms into their brains anymore. Some of the exoskeletons. Yes. To see someone who's been in a chair be able to stand up because of this technology that is helping them. Or people who can turn off the light in their room by thinking about it. It's extraordinary, and it's happening. Can you imagine not having to ask someone to turn off the light every time you wanted to turn off? Thinking about turn off the light, and it did. These are magic things. I mean, so it's not just that you know, you need an entire human body to be conscious. I'm not saying that if you're damaged in any way that you can't be conscious. But, you know, I just wondered whether, you know, all of the things that we need, all the touch and the smell and the wind in our hair and all of these things that go together to bring information to ourselves, to our brains, and to give us a picture of how the world is. It's not just, we're not just brains on a stick. I think that's, you know, all of our tactile and all of the things that our whole body tells us must be important.
That was, I love the way you referred to yourself as a curious Homo sapien, Ramona. That is such a beautiful summary of the you that we find in this book. I'm really grateful for that. We're getting close to 8. It's about 5:02, and Rhonda Chapman has written, very lovely to hear your voice, Ramona. I really missed you on the airwaves and can't wait to read this. So she'll be
I'm so pleased.
She'll be hearing your voice in the text, I'm sure, having heard you talk tonight.
I think that all those years on the radio means that that's the way I write. I mean, I write as if I'm talking, as if I'm explaining. Yeah. It's good training for a writer to have to explain to people who can't see something.
Absolutely.
What it is that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think it's probably, you know, where I learned how to do it, to give you the salient points of it, to get you to feel as if you're there, to see in your mind's eye what it is that I'm talking about.
And such a gift to the reader too, because we literally can hear your voice as we're reading the book, because it's such a familiar voice to us. So, you know, that's such a bonus when you're reading a voice that you know. So we're lucky. Does anyone else have a question for Ramona? Either unmute yourself or pop something in the group chat and I can ask it on your behalf. If anyone has a question for Ramona. I'd certainly recommend your best bet is to get out and borrow the book. I have this one here. I know the library, Goldfield Libraries have others, and I plan to take this down to the library tomorrow and get them to put it into library stock. So there's another one to circulate, because I know how it can be. Sorry, Ramona. I know you rely on the royalties, but
no.
It means such a lot to people.
I'm very happy for people to read it. I don't care whether they pay for it or not. I'm very happy. After all that writing, I'd be delighted if people wanted to read it.
To have people reading it. Yep, there'll be a long list, I'll bet you. No. That's just Stuart saying, yay. He must think that we're nearly finished. Ramona, I can't thank you enough. What have you told us? I know, I've written here, towards the end of the book, you wrote, we've always told each other stories and we watch for that spark of understanding in our listeners' eyes. And it's a real pity that you weren't able to see that spark of understanding in all our audience's eyes tonight. They've been able to see it in yours, and that's a blessing. But I guess you're accustomed to the radio, so you know.
I am. I'm just accustomed to imagining that there are people.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a gift in this time we're in, that we're nearly out of. Hope you'll soon be back talking to audiences face to face, meeting people in bookshops as they press them into your hands for you to sign. And telling them stories and seeing that terrific spark. It's been great talking with you, and thanks to you and to everyone else who tuned in tonight. I can see some of your faces up there. It's great to see you. Oh, I can see some sparks of understanding there, Ramona. We're so lucky.
Robyn, thank you so much for your kindness and for your lovely questions, and for Stuart to have arranged it. And
yes,
it's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for the book, Ramona. Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you, Robyn. Thank you, Ramona. That was excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for coming. And as I said before, we have lots of different events coming up. So please check out our YouTube channel, our Facebook pages. Make sure you sign up for any newsletters that we may or may not send out from different branches as well. Check it. Come into the branches. You're allowed to now, and you have been for a little while. Just make sure you're wearing a mask. That's the only thing at the moment. So you can come in, borrow, browse. Please come in if you didn't know you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to come back in. We'd love to see you. We're loving seeing all the people who are coming back through. And thank you all once again for coming. Good night.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you.
Good night. Night, Ramona.
Night, Robyn. Thank you.